continuing this series today called Shattered, and we're looking at events in our lives in which we feel like we're falling to a million pieces. And also acknowledging that when those events happen, and it's not always fun to talk about those obviously, but they happen. When those events happen, we find that we hold beliefs about life, assumptions, views, and that when life falls apart, those assumptions, those views, those beliefs can fall apart as well. The things that we relied on for a sense of security just seem to fall to the floor. And we discovered that we had a false sense of security. And now what do? It's almost like going through a double crisis. Something difficult has happened, but now what we believed about life is no longer holding water for us either. And so as we're looking at those beliefs, though, we also want to replace them with beliefs that do work. And we're affirming together, I wonder if you could give me a head nod on this, we're affirming together that out of broken pieces can come wholeness. How about an amen for that one? Out of broken pieces can come wholeness. And you may be facing something right now and you really don't believe that. I don't know your story this morning. It may be that you're really wondering, is there really hope? We have people who watch on the live stream, people who watch later. Is there really hope in this situation? It's easy to say these things, isn't it, when you're not really going through a hard time, right? But it's when you're facing this kind of a situation where it can be extremely difficult, and it can be life and death, to be able to affirm that out of broken pieces can come wholeness, and we can have hope in that. So that's what we're talking about in this series. And when we go through a hard time, if we're in church and around people who have been in the church culture for a long time, you'll hear this cliche, it's going to happen. And it goes something like this. God will never give you, can you finish it with me? More than you can handle. How many have heard that before? It's just one of those things, it's going to happen, right? There's going to be a dust storm in the summer in Arizona, right? And there's somebody's going to say this phrase, God will never give you more than you can handle. And it sounds really positive, doesn't it? It sounds like we got this. We can, right? I mean, there's a positive connotation. We can take care of this. We can kick this thing. We can make it through this. It sounds positive, but there's some things about this phrase that are troubling. And so I put this question on my Facebook page this week. I said, this Sunday I'm talking about the shortcomings of the phrase, God will never give you more than you can handle. It seems encouraging, but it fails in at least a couple of ways. Want to start now? What is at least one problem you see with this phrase? And I'm just going to read the replies from my Facebook page. One person wrote, I don't know that God gives bad things. It's like God won't give you, right? So that implies that God is giving things to you. All right, so the person says, I don't know that God gives bad things. I also know many people who crack under the pressure. So handle it? Yeah. Right. Somebody else said, well-meaning people often use the phrase to try to be helpful, but in the midst of a crisis or when overwhelmed, this phrase can feel like a Band-Aid of thorns. Isn't that a great phrase? Band-Aid of thorns. Something that is said to justify the pain one is going through. Yes, it is true that we often grow through challenges, our faith matures and is refined, but often what we want in the midst of a dark night of the soul is someone to just come alongside us and love us, not someone to throw a platitude at us. In the midst of the dark night, people who listen, who bring us food, who wipe our tears, who just love, show up as the hands and feet of God in action, not a verse that attempts to justify what we're going through. Isn't that great? Somebody else said, this may seem heretical and extreme, and then in parentheses, she says, I'm okay with that. I love this person. I've had to intentionally move away from assigning the term blessed to God. Everything that happens is a blessing from God, a tax return, a perfect garage sale, I find, etc. I've chosen to distance myself from seeing God as hyper-benevolent or as somebody who is the root cause of painful stuff. Does that make sense? This is good stuff here this person's writing. For me, seeing God as the perpetrator of trauma, stacking up struggle after struggle to test our emotional or physical resolve, made it hard to move towards God. I believe God is for us. A couple more. Somebody else said, because it sort of seems like you're getting punished for being strong. Right? Brilliant stuff. I don't even have to preach sermons anymore. I found out. Just put a question on my Facebook page and these people take care of it for me. Because if you aren't handling it, then it's because you don't have enough faith or something. Even Jesus needed some help and felt like it was too much for him to handle. I think of the Garden of Gethsemane, his prayer. Somebody else said, I think the biggest problem with this statement is that it makes God out to be this bully who is causing, allowing, or even prompting the pain, trouble, struggle, or tragedy. Two more. Listen to this. After my brother died when I was 16, it gets real. This thought swirled around in my head, and it made me angry at God, made me distrusting of God, even made me hate God. It took a long time for that harmful view of God generated by terrible life experiences and Band-Aid phrases to become rectified. When God is handling or allowing us a problem for us to handle, we lose sight of the God who sits in the midst of our trouble with us and grieves alongside us in the process. Last one. It's a short phrase that gets to the point. I certainly got more than I could handle as a child and things I had no control of, the death of my father, for starters. Just real life experience that challenges this phrase that is often meant as a cliche. So, first of all, as these people said, saying God won't give you more than you can handle infers that God is the source of these things that you are having trouble handling. That God, it's like you're Rocky and God is Ivan Drago. And in a thick Russian accent, God says, I will break you. And it's supposed to be comforting, like he'll beat you down, but he won't kill you. Like he'll make your face look like Rocky at the end of the movie, but he won't kill you. And that's supposed to be comforting somehow. And so it makes God the cause of these things. It's possible that this idea comes from a verse in 1 Corinthians, and somebody else mentioned this on the Facebook post, actually, they said, I think this comes from this verse, and I'd love to hear you deal with this. So it's a verse from Paul. It says, no temptation has overtaken you except what is common to humankind, and God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear, but when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can endure it. So God won't let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. Perhaps the phrase, God won't give you more than you can handle, came from that phrase. Well, let's look at this or that verse. First of all, it's a temptation. It doesn't say that God is the cause of that temptation, correct? You with me now? It doesn't say God's the cause of that temptation. It just says he'll make a way out. So not everything that happens to you in life, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a temptation, something that could ruin your life. When you're tempted by something that could ruin your life, there's a way out. That's what this verse seems to mean. It doesn't mean everything that happens to you in life comes from God, but he won't kill you. He'll stop right before you die. It doesn't mean that, but it's probably, where this idea comes from. So perhaps God is not the source of these things. Perhaps God is not a divine chess player and we're all pawns and he's just moving us around willy-nilly. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago when we looked at the phrase, everything happens for a reason. Perhaps God is not the cause of all these things. At the same time, there is not an agreement in the Bible on this question. We're going to look at scripture verses today that view God as the cause. And so there are scripture verses that view God as the cause of everything that happens in the Bible, and there are scripture verses that don't view God as the cause of everything that happens in the Bible, which brings us to Bible interpretation, what we'll talk about next week. That the Bible doesn't speak with one voice on every issue, and this is one of them. But another problem with this statement is that when you say God won't give you more than you can handle, define handle, right? What do you mean by handle? If it means you don't die, well, it's not so comforting, right? And then the truth is, some sickness or some event is going to do that too at some point. So it's not even true. If that's what we're only human. So if that's what we mean by handle, then it's just not true. And then when we say, well, you can handle it, well, isn't it true that there are experiences we have in this life and they're so painful and they're so crushing that it's not quite accurate to say, oh, we can handle that. You know what I'm saying? That when we say, oh, I can handle it, it sounds like we're minimizing the actual weight that we're feeling there, the actual pain that is caused there. It ignores one of the most primal experiences of life, that pain changes us, that what we endure changes us somehow. We don't just go through life unaffected by experiences that we have. What have you experienced that was so painful that it changed you? What was that for you? There are several things, certainly. What have you had to endure that has changed you, that left a mark on you in some way? A friend of mine was 5 or 6 years old when his little sister was born, and she was born with several developmental problems. And so as a kid, when he needed attention from his parents, the sibling was born who basically consumed all of their attention because of her own needs that she couldn't help, of course. And so instead of attending to him and giving him the attention he needed, his parents were consumed with caring for his little sister. And she passed away when she was a few years old. Now, he's a good guy, he's a smart guy, he's done okay in life, but he knows that had an effect on him. Our experiences early on in life have an effect on us, whether we want to believe that or not. It can surprise us by how much of an effect they have on us. And so that left a mark. That was so painful to him. He had to endure this thing that was so painful that it left a scar on him. I talked before about my mom. My mom was born right after my grandmother lost her oldest child. And so my mom was born into this situation where her mom was grieving. Her oldest child, a son, had died of a kidney disease. This was back in the 1950s, something that would be totally curable today. And so my grandmother was grieving the loss of a child while raising an infant. And it's just real life, isn't it? No matter how hard you try as a mother, that's just going to have an effect. And my mom thinks that did have an effect on her life, and she's probably right. There are some things that are so painful they leave a mark. April 5th was Arizona Gives Day. They just around the state where folks give to charities. And my friend Rabbi Shmuley donated to both one church and Chandler Christian Community Center. So a rabbi donated to a church. Right? So that's a guy who understands that goodness is bigger than any one religious system, right? Well, he's been here a couple of times. And I remember one of the times, at least, that he spoke, he talked about the scar, this is obvious, left by the Holocaust on the Jewish people, and how many generations it can take for a people to work, to kind of get themselves out of the pain of this traumatic event, like 7 generations or something. And so imagine, talking to Rabbi Shmuley, and this is just absurd, and in reference to the Holocaust, and talking about handling it. Just that word doesn't do justice to the pain, to the difficulty that folks endure. Pain changes us. There's this story in Genesis chapter 32 about an episode where a man named Jacob is alone one night, and he has this mysterious encounter with a being that he wrestles throughout the night. And so Jacob cheated his brother Esau out of money. And they've been estranged for years, and Jacob's going now to be reunited with his brother, and he's sure that his brother's going to kill him out of revenge. He's terrified. And it says that he's left alone. His family goes on, and he's left on this side of the river while they cross over, and this bizarre thing happens. One night, this mysterious being appears to him, and it turns out this being is God. And he wrestles with God. And so Genesis 32, verse 24 says, "So Jacob was left alone, and the man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, so God doesn't kill him." This is going back into the theology of God causing things. He touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go until you bless me." Skipping ahead a few verses, says Jacob was limping because of his hip. So in this verse, God's seen as the cause. Jesus said something different. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. But this really is a story of life and maturity, and going through life and realizing that we face things in life that we don't get out of without a limp. Can anybody agree to that? Yeah, me too. That we go through things in life where it just leaves a scar. It leaves a mark. And it does something to us. Steve Norman is a pastor in Michigan, and he writes for the blog On Faith, and he wrote this. It won't be on the screen, but I just want to read a couple of paragraphs to you. He said, "When we yearn for spiritual breakthrough, when we finally latch on and refuse to let go, God gives us a powerful gift, an undeniable awareness of our own brokenness, our frailty. It's a gift none of us would ever choose on our own, as we inherently resist any admission of weakness. What was the first lesson many of us learned from our fathers when we were hurt? Don't cry. And the first lesson we learned in competitive sports, show no weakness. And the advice we gave ourselves the first time young love broke our hearts, don't flinch. Don't let anyone know, especially him or her, that this hurts. How many of us have spent significant seasons of our lives masking our hurts and hiding our weakness? It's horribly taxing. It's a lot of work to live the lie of invincibility, isn't it? But we, like Jacob, are prone to think that if we want to win in life, we toughen up and learn to play through the pain, hurt, insecurity, and wounds. Last paragraph. Maybe this is why God wrenches Jacob's hip, at least in this story. God is the cause. It's a story probably about life, all right? But in this theology, God is the cause. Because only God knows Jacob can't receive the blessing he craves until he is free to admit his brokenness. It's a principle that the modern recovery movement expresses in the first of 12 steps. If I'm to confront my demons head on, I begin by admitting that I'm powerless over my addiction and life has become unmanageable. Rather than hide my limp, I can walk with it openly. It reminds me and declares to others that I'm not as strong as I want to be, and that's okay. Isn't that a powerful phrase? So perhaps that change that pain brings is actually maturity. And it's actually something that can put me in touch with my humanity and help me experience all that life has for me instead of having a feeling of invincibility. It reminds me of something Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians, or as the Donald would say, 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 7. You got to throw in a dig at the Donald every once in a while when you get a chance. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 7 through 10. Paul writes this, and he seems to infer God as the cause here again. Again, there are different things, there are different views in the Bible. But he says, therefore, in order to keep me from being conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh. Have you heard this passage before? A messenger of Satan in his theology and his worldview to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Some people think this was blindness, poor eyesight. Maybe Paul was talking about that as a thorn in his flesh. We don't really know what it was. He prays for God to take it away, and God doesn't take it away. And he says, my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness. That just sounds weird, doesn't it? It doesn't look good on a resume. I boast about my weakness. That doesn't play well in job interviews, does it? So that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why for Christ's sake I delight in weaknesses and insults and hardships and persecutions and difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Perhaps it's okay if you never handle it. That's just something that, I don't know, does that rub you the wrong way? When you think about what's hurt you, the pain that you faced in life, and we want to win. We're Americans, America. We win in America. And we kick butt in America, and we always overcome, and that's behind me, and I can talk about my hardships in church as long as they were 10 years ago. Like Aaron said, people feel pressure to feel perfect in church or pretend to be perfect. But what if I never handle it? Are you okay if you never actually handle it? So I'll share a little bit, and there's a risk in me sharing because there's a stigma to going to counseling. There's, pastors kind of have targets on their backs when they talk about things like this. Several times in my life, now I've gone to counseling for a period of time, and it's been really beneficial to me. I've found that the people who talk down about counseling are often the people who need it the most. So if you're in counseling or you have been before, I affirm that. I think it's great. I think it's a great choice. And I decided a couple of months ago, 3 months ago, that I'm going to go to counseling for a while. I'm going to deal with some stuff that I want to deal with. And so it's dangerous for a pastor to say that, isn't it? It's just true. It's just the nature of church, and so folks start looking for cracks in the armor. Does this guy have problems, that I need to be aware of that disqualify him from being a pastor? And so it's just, I feel lame having to give disclaimers like that, but it's just true. And so I decided I want to go back to counseling, and I want to work on some things. And as I did, my assumption was, I've dealt with, mom and dad issues. I've gone to counseling before, and I have a degree in counseling, actually. And which, when people have a degree in counseling, you know what that means, right? Like they've been dealing with some stuff. And so, I went back to this great counselor, and I had this assumption, I've already dealt with that stuff. I've already dealt with issues from my childhood and the mommy and daddy issues. So session 1, we'll say, 2.5 minutes in, it becomes obvious, wait a second, I guess I didn't really fully deal with those issues from early childhood, those mom and dad issues. And I was like, oh man, I thought I handled that. And it turns out I hadn't handled that. And so as we've gone through these sessions, it's been great. It's helped me in ways, to be honest, I feel like I'm a good dad. I love my children. But it's made me even better as a dad. I've had some really good insights about that. And one of the things the counselor said to me really challenged me. Maybe like this statement challenges some of you. As we were talking about some pretty deep experiences one day, he said, embrace your emptiness. Doesn't it sound like it's something a guru would say, like a Buddhist monk somewhere, like, embrace your emptiness. And it hit me so hard, it rubbed me the wrong way. Because I want to fill my emptiness. I don't want to embrace my emptiness. I want to do something to fill the void, right? I want to win. I want to cure it. I want to handle it. And he said, embrace your emptiness. I told a friend about that, and we've joked about it since. So just like randomly in conversations, we're like, hey, embrace your emptiness, right? It's just a phrase, wow, what? And as we talked about it and I've reflected on it, I've realized it's to this point that it's when we think that we've handled it that we begin to pretend that we've handled it. And we make ourselves blind to the residue that's left over from these painful experiences, the scars, the limp. And we pretend we're not limping. And now we have real problems. But if we can embrace our emptiness and be okay if I never quite handle it, well, now I can be an open, vulnerable, aware person who knows about my own issues. And I found that people who go to counseling, they deal with their stuff and they're okay with this. They tend to be actually healthier people than people who never have. And so, is that true of you? Is there a way that you could be okay embracing your emptiness, or that you could be okay if you never quite handle it? That you don't have to act like it. Now, it doesn't mean you don't heal. And of course, you heal over time and we grow and pain changes us. But is it okay if you don't have to pretend to handle it? And then finally, perhaps, I think this is another way of saying that my power is made perfect in weakness. You can find beauty in your scars. You can find beauty in the mark that has been left or the limp that you walk with. Tina Fey has a scar under the left side of her mouth. Isn't Tina Fey hilarious? Like one of the most gifted comedians, just absolutely phenomenal. She has this scar, can you see it there on the screen? Under the left side of her mouth and kind of up the side of her face. When she was 5 years old, a stranger ran into her front yard with a knife and slashed her face. Randomly. I mean, can you imagine the trauma of that? And so she was giving an interview about this in People magazine, and she said, got stitched up, and I proceeded unaware of it. I was a very confident little kid. It's almost like I'm kind of able to forget about it until I was on camera, said Faye, whose scenes are often shot from the right side. She said, supposedly, I will go crazy. My therapist says when Alice, her daughter, turns 5, you may go crazy, like bringing back the memories or something. But she has this scar on her face that, she's a famous actress. She's a movie actor. She's an A-list comedian. That has not affected her career. And she's able to go on and joke about it, talk about it, and succeed in spite of that. Perhaps your pain, your scar, has been left by something that you did. Perhaps a failure, a personal failure of some kind. Rob Bell writes in his new book, How to Be Here. And yet that failure made you a better person. The pain changed you. You failed, but it worked in your favor. You failed, but it made you stronger, more resilient, more appreciative. You failed, but it created all sorts of new life and growth and maturity in you. You failed, but you're now realizing that failure isn't all it's cracked up to be. This is the beautiful, counterintuitive, strange, unexpected, reliable mystery built into the fabric of creation that is at work every time we fail. There can be beauty in your failure and in your scars. Pain changes us. Maybe it's okay if you don't handle it. There can be beauty in your scars, in the limp that you have. When Wendy Crawford was 19, she was a model. and she had a car accident. And that car accident left her a quadriplegic. So a 19-year-old model who now has become a quadriplegic. And you can imagine the pain that caused in her own life with the standards of beauty in our culture, but of course if that's your career, and being a young woman just starting out in that, life now is completely different. She's gone through pain that has changed her, that is greater than really a person can handle. Handle isn't quite accurate. And so now, as she's grown older, she's gone through this experience of being, this woman who had her identity in a modeling career, but is now going through life as a quadriplegic. And what she's done, now 30 years later, is that now she's not only still posing in front of a camera, but she's empowering other women with disabilities to do the same thing. So she's created what's called the Raw Beauty Project in New York City. And Today.com reported this. She was hit by a drunk driver, by the way, completely out of her control. What she's done is that she gathers up women who face disabilities, could be wheelchair or loss of a limb or anything else, and she photographs these ladies. They're models, and they put these photos on display to shatter stereotypes and raise awareness that there can be beauty beyond the surface standards of beauty in our culture. And she says models become empowered by it and realize there are so many other things they can do. So here's a couple-minute video about the Raw Beauty Project. Doesn't that make like traditional modeling seem boring? I mean, it's like you're not cool if you're not in a wheelchair after you see that. Because that is such a striking picture of inner beauty, of power, of being okay with not handling it, although you could make the case that they are handling it, of being okay if you literally walk with a limp, acknowledging that pain changes us, right? I mean, it's just an incredible picture. How has your pain changed you? Instead of saying things like, well, hey, God won't give you more than you can handle. Maybe God's not the cause of it anyway. And I don't know what handling means, but how has your pain changed you? We're going to pray together in a minute. We're going to sing together in a minute. I just want to ask you in this time, though, because we have a few more minutes left together, and I believe that amazing things can happen when we gather like this, as we reflect in a kind of a prayerful attitude and the support of other people around us. You're not alone in the room here. How has your pain changed you? And whatever has really pushed you to the brink, what has that done in your life? What were those experiences? How has that changed you as a person? And are you okay if you never quite handle that? If you still walk with a limp? If things aren't the same as they used to be, are you okay with that? And is there a way for you to find beauty? Not in the experience, okay? We don't want to be in denial and act like everything's always great. That's not what we're talking about. But even in the marks that are left from the experiences you've had, can you find beauty in those? Are you able to do that? And I think if there's a way that you can find beauty in your scars, perhaps that's what real healing looks like. Don't even worry about handling it. But over time, if you can find beauty in the scars, what would that look like for you? How has your pain changed you? Are you okay with not handling it? Can you see beauty in your scars, even if you walk with a limp?